week 6 on the negative effect of the martyrs of the church. When we study the history of the early church, we often overestimate the amount of state-sponsored persecution. Instead, Rome's attacks on Christians were sporadic, but still severe. Additionally, we tend, as Christians, to focus on how the testimony of the martyrs helped to spread the gospel. While this is true, the legacy of organized persecution was quite a bit more complex in reality. It was intended to remove Christian culture from Roman society. The persecution under Emperor Decius managed to do substantial harm to the early church by distorting certain aspects of its theology, and it led to divisions in the church. Led to a Christian culture that emphasized martyrdom and the role of martyrs, and popularized the practice of relic collection. So first, it led to divisions in the church. And so, first you need to know that the church was a secret meeting that the Christians went to each week. And so the Romans were very suspicious about what they were doing. And so they thought Christians, one of the many things they thought Christians were doing at these secret gatherings was eating a human being. And I quote, "An infant covered with flour in order to deceive the weary." And so what they thought was the child being eaten was communion. And so the Romans were confused, and the Christians were in turn hurting the Roman Empire. And so, And so then the Romans decided to hold an empire-wide sacrifice to show the loyalty of their subjects. And so the sacrifice was to the Roman gods. And of course Christians did not like this because they don't sacrifice to other gods besides the one and only God. And so when you sacrifice, you would receive the certificate saying that you, yes, indeed had done the sacrifice. And so many Christians faked the certificate. Some left town when the sacrifice people were coming. And some found no problem with doing the sacrifice, so they would go up to the altar and sprinkle a little bit on, and maybe do it to Jesus instead of the Roman gods, and would get the certificate that way. And then some Christians were like, no, we don't believe in the sacrifice, and so they would go to the temple and be like, we're not going to do it, so then they would die. Or some of them weren't actually killed, they were allowed to survive. And so this caused division in the church, with the people who sacrificed and because you can see this and it caused a division because people would come to church, and there would be a person sitting there who had just done the sacrifice, and then there would be another person maybe sitting next to them whose whole family was just slaughtered because they wouldn't sacrifice. And so it caused a division. And so the people who sacrificed were kicked out of the church, even if they were bishops, or leaders in the church. And so this split the church in half. And so my second point was that it emphasized the martyrdom and the role of martyrs. So what a martyr is someone who's killed for their cause. So these martyrs would be the people who were killed because they didn't sacrifice to the Roman gods. And these people who didn't sacrifice were the last good generation. And so those who died, and I quote, "Those who died in the last period of persecution became a new foundational generation for those born after the 331 Edict of Milan." And so they were something that people looked up to. And so these martyrs went from just simple role models, like just someone to look up to and be like, wow, they did something great, to becoming idols. And so people wrote multiple songs and hymns and prayers of these martyrs, and even collected relics of them, which I'll get into in my next point. And so one of these famous martyrs is a girl called Perpetua. I don't know if I'm saying that right, probably not. And so she was a Roman Christian woman who was taken to jail because she wouldn't renounce her faith. And so she was in jail, and her families came. She had like a son in the jail, and multiple people were like, you need to renounce your faith and get out of the situation so you can raise your son. And she was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stand firm in my faith. And so she was led into the arena, and she faced many wild animals and survived. And then a young gladiator was sent out to kill her, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. So she grabbed his sword and brought the sword up to her throat and killed herself that way. So, as you can see, people really love this because it was someone standing up for their faith and being strong, and they wanted to look up to that, but they took it a little too far. So my third point is that they began the practice of relic collection. And so because these martyrs became idols, their items also became idols themselves. So this could be like simple clothing, bones, or things that they touched like handkerchiefs that people believed had healing properties or had something magical or good about them. And there were people, the purists, were very much against the selling and keeping of relics, but Saint Jerome fought against and said that it was just a form of remembering the person who had died for their cause. And they weren't worshipped, although they does seem like they were. Like in some churches nowadays, they still have the bones, or supposedly the bones of some of the martyrs that are in the cathedral, and you can see them, and they're very nicely dressed in like gold and jewels. And so it's kind of hard to distinguish if they were actually worshipping them, but it does seem like they were. And so, but then, because they took it too far, we should really just remember what the testimony of the martyrs, but we should always be careful to focus on their God rather than on them. And this is something that the people in the early church failed to do, and they instead idolized the martyrs, instead of just saying, wow, they did a good work for Jesus. And so, although the persecution was intended to remove Christian culture from Roman Emperor, and it didn't remove it, but it did hurt it by distorting certain aspects of its theology, which then led to divisions within the church, and then a Christian culture which emphasized martyrdom and the role of martyrs, and it also popularized the practice of relic collection. Thank you.